Okay, well, welcome. Let's see if we get sound, if we get it back. Oh, so is the time. I guess the internet is pretty clogged. Let me just make sure we're still going good. Daniel, can I get a hand raise if you can hear audio and video? All right. Okay, so this is probably just going to be what we have to all live with for right now. It's funny because our daughter was watching some show and all of a sudden it kept going into buffering. And so apparently Netflix was throttling even the internet. So my daughter, or our daughter, Avel, she put together a little sign, as you can see up here in the corner, stay safe. She had a lot of fun putting that together, so she wanted everybody to see that today. So get a big hand raise for her. She'll love to see that. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to talk about some of the financial engineering that we do in our firm. Now, again, I see a bunch of people on here that are not another financial planner on here. So this will give the financial planner some insight into the difference between just managing assets and really financial engineering to figure out what is the best outcome to design a blueprint. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to do a lot of examples on a tool that we use, money. So that today you're actually going to get to see a lot of what our planners actually are doing for the clients in the background. And for some of you that aren't in love with numbers, I'm going to kind of go through and just explain, because some of you that are familiar with numbers, some of you retired engineers, I'm sure I could fly through this and you would get this in just a second. For some people that are just not that type of person, that's okay. We're going to go through it slow and help you understand. And the goal of today is not for you to become a financial engineer. It is for you to understand what some of the possibilities are and then work with a planner, but it'll also help you understand what you have to put together in order for the outcome of these numbers to be accurate. All right, so with that in mind, we'll get started. And before I do get started, I do want to say one thing. Is the reason I'm going to show you this book at the beginning, and don't worry, it's not a product promotion. As a matter of fact, we're giving it away for free. We had some excess ones at the producer of the and we're willing to send those out to you. And this book, which is called, we refer to it as TRF, Total Return. And other than some of the tax brackets or percentages that are listed in the book, because obviously some of those have changed since 2016, the methods and the processes that I talk about and I teach in that book are going to be the same today as they were 4.5 years ago. So if you want a copy of that book, here's how you get it. Just call Mandy, and you see the number there. It's 844-702-1040. Or you could actually email Emma at admin@hhtba.net. We'll send you that book out for free. And today, let's really concentrate on just the process that we have and that we use. So let's just start off talking about what is your process and your tool. And I brought this up because the abacus, because there's so many people that will believe that they have a financial planner. And yes, it is actually illegal for someone to call themselves a financial planner who is not. You have insurance agents, annuity salespeople. You have people running around that are not actually a financial planner, but they call themselves a financial planner. And look, putting together a mutual fund portfolio, putting together a stock portfolio, or putting together an annuity portfolio does not make you a financial planner. You're going to see that in a few minutes. You're going to see the intense amount of education understanding, and skill set that you need to be a financial planner. And yes, there is a law against it. Yes, there are penalties, but we have found that the federal government does not enforce those penalties very well. So people continue to get away with it. It confuses the public. It's very frustrating. It's been one of the most frustrating things that I've ever gone through. It would almost be like, going through the rigors of becoming an MD, and then anybody's allowed to call themselves an MD, or anybody's allowed to call themselves a doctor. Well, that is the problem with the financial planning industry right now, and you're going to see that in a minute. So I think after you see today, you're going to have a whole new appreciation for what your financial planners, your true financial planners, are really doing for you. So let's talk about what are the processes that you have to use. And when I say the abacus, and the reason I say that is because most time people will call and they'll say, do you think I should do a Roth conversion? And their supposed financial advisor will say, oh, no, don't do that. How much in calculations are they doing to figure out if you should or if you should not? Or do they actually have a tool? Most of them just flip off the hip and say, hey, this is what we think you should do. So having a process really is about looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats, and making sure that you're looking at all the different angles like an engineer would look at things. So the financial planner has to combine an artistic side like an architect to be able to design things, but then also like an engineer to be able to stress test and understand what you can and what you can't do. So you have to figure those things out, but then you have to have a tool. And that tool we use is called e-money. Now, e-money, the reason most financial planners or even financial advisors don't use e-money is it is very, very expensive. And so when a person says that they are a financial advisor, but they're not using e-money, then I really question what they're really doing to perform the calculations. So e-money is one of the biggest calculation tools that's out there. And you're going to see that in a second. It allows the financial engineer, the financial planner, to really hardcore those calculations to find out what's best for you. Finally, once you figure out engineering-wise what is best for you, then you have to have a blueprint. You got to be able to put it into an actionable build list and then have the people that actually know how to build it. For years and years, I saw where okay, are we back? Let's see. Can I get some hand raises to see if we're back online? All right. Sorry about that. Again, this has been fun. We even have a redundant system even in my home. And even with that redundant system, which flips from one internet to the other, we have found just in the last 4 or 5 weeks, everything has just been going kaput. So anyway, let's get back to that. So for many years, I would see that people would pay these fees for financial plans. They would get this big binder and it would say, these are all the things that we are recognizing. They would send the people home with the binders. And then when they would come see us, of course I have. And here's the binder. And I'll ask them, what did you actually do after you got the financial plan? Well, nothing. And I would ask, well, what were the recommendations? Buy an annuity, buy a mutual fund, buy some kind of product or something of that manner. And I would explain that's not a financial plan, as you're about to see right now. And so a financial plan is a living and a breathing and an ongoing process. It is not something that you get in a binder. It's not something that you print out to read. It's like a blueprint that you build and like a rental property that you have to continue to manage it ongoing. So again, you have to have a blueprint so that you build things. So let's talk about the first step in the planning process. And this step might be something that for our clients, you've been through this process. For the people that are joining us today that have not been through this process, this will probably be the first time that you've heard this linear versus bell curve. Now, where this comes from is if you don't know who I am, I've been doing this for 3.5 decades, going on 36 years. And I laugh because I've been around as long as the College for Financial Planning. We follow most of the generally accepted financial planning practices that the college outlines. Those are certain tests, just like physicians have certain guidelines, accountants have certain guidelines. We follow certain guidelines, but there are certain things that I don't follow. And the reason is that some of those things I have proven not to be accurate, not because I don't believe that the college knows what they're doing, but because in my own experience, I've seen a very different outcome. And this really is where I get to the linear versus the bell curve. So let's talk about what the difference is. When we have a linear plan, and by the way, real quick, the College for Financial Planning generally teaches linear planning. And that is a customized, in other words, if you 9 out of 10 financial plans, you will generally see these plans prepared on a linear type of plan. So what it shows is just an increase in income with inflation. So it shows a certain amount of increase of Social Security, a certain amount of increase in maybe a pension plan if it has a COLA, and it takes you out until life expectancy. So these two planes are going like this all the way until life expectancy. Now that sounds reasonable, right? I mean, that's how you think you should plan. However, I've had a very different experience, which is why I created the bell curve plan. I created that because I've seen this difference in generations. So when I first started practicing, I had the generation that was at the end of World War II. So back in the 80s, I had a lot of the World War II veterans. And their parents had come out of the Depression. And there was a very, very different culture or attitude towards how they handled money. The Depression babies, the World War II people, they were the ones that basically said, I want to make sure that I leave as much as I can to my kids. I don't care if I don't travel. I don't care if I don't buy another car. I don't care if my house is falling apart, as long as I leave as much as I can to my kids. And then somewhere in the 90s to mid to late 90s, I started to see this trend changing. As people were coming in and asking me to plan out their futures, the desire and the goal changed. It was now, listen, I have educated my kids and I have spent a lot of money educating my kids. I have sacrificed. And my desire is not to just leave a large lump sum of money for my kids. My desire now is I want to live to the fullest extent that I can live to. And if there's something left, great. But I'm not going to live at lesser of a standard of living, or I'm not going to live like a pauper just so my kids or somebody else can inherit more. And so I started seeing this trend change, which is why I created the bell curve. Now, how does the bell curve work? Well, in linear planning, again, everything just goes up at the same rate. What bell curve planning does is it shows that you are going to increase the amount of spending while you are growing older, but you're going to reach a certain point where that spending is actually going to decrease. And here's what I also saw. In the 80s and even in the early 90s, people were not living nearly as long as they are today. So when we were planning back then, we were assuming that a person would live to maybe 75 years old at the latest, maybe 78. And then all of a sudden, this thing happened called the computer chip. And I would attribute the extension in life expectancy to the computer chip, because what did the computer chip do? Well, it gave humans the knowledge. They gained more knowledge in 30 years than they did in 10,000 years. That included drugs, medicines, longevity, and obviously we all started living longer. Now, what happened when we live longer, it doesn't mean that we're living at a greater standard of living. It also doesn't mean that we have the same mobility or the same health. So drugs and machines can keep us alive longer. It doesn't mean that we still have that same enjoyment of life. So what I was finding is that while my clients were living longer, right around age 78 to around 80, things would change drastically. Whereas the 70 to 75-year-old, they're going on cruise ships, they're going on RV trips. I had my mid-70 clients literally driving from one end of the country to the other end of the country, or taking world cruises, world plane flights. But now what I saw was when they got to about 78 to 80, that didn't happen anymore. Very small percentage of them still were able to, but a majority of them were not able to. So the planning changed, not because of anything else other than this change with the longevity, but the lack of quality of life. And so now when I created the bell curve, it makes more sense, because as we get older, and this isn't just something off the hip, these are things that we do people's tax returns. We keep track of budgets. We have the statistical proof over 30 years to show that when they get to a certain age, it's not what the financial community is telling people. My sinister side says that the financial community, made up of banks, brokerage companies, and mutual funds, what they want you to do is to keep more in the investments, because they want to lead you to believe under fear that you are going to need more at an age 100. My statistics do not show that. So this is why I advocate spending more while you can enjoy it, while you're healthy, while you're mobile enough to do it. And it doesn't just have to be free. It could be, instead of waiting until you die to gift money, you could start gifting money to kids and grandkids. You know why I like that idea? I've had many people that we set up gifting programs for, and under the premise that, listen, why don't we gift now? We'll see how they handle the money. And after we found out how they mismanaged the money, we went back and changed their trusts. We went back and changed the estate plan to accommodate that the kids or the grandkids were not at that type of mental management that we could trust them with large sums of money. So again, the bell curve really has to do with spending more until you reach a certain age. Again, my suggestion is somewhere around 78 to 80, but again, you can make that determination on when you start to decrease the actual spending. Now, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to first have to determine what your want versus need budget actually is. Now, in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and bring up a website, and I'm going to pull it into view here. And for those of you that know what this is, you'll know that this is eMoney, because you've worked with your planners within eMoney. For those of you that are attending today that have never seen this, this will be quite an eye-opener for you, especially if you're dealing with somebody that is calling themselves a financial planner or the financial advisor. When you start to see what we're able to do with this tool, again, this is the big, massive computer tool that we're able to test and model things out, you'll understand how hard those financial planners are working for you in the background. So let's go and talk about the need versus the want. I'm going to show you where we're going to build that out within eMoney. And first, we're going to go into facts. And in your eMoney, you can work with your financial planner on this. You'll have a budget worksheet. And in that worksheet, the planner is going to build out with you whether it is a want or whether it is a need, represented by this required button. Then what they're going to do is they're going to figure out 4 different periods of time. What is the current amount you're spending on a certain expense? What is the semi-retirement? Now, we seldom use this. This might be, as an example, if we've had physicians that were making $1 million a year, and then all of a sudden they go to work as a professor at a medical school and they're making $200,000 a year. They are transitioning into that new position. But typically the semi-retirement amount is going to equal what the retirement amount is. And again, the bell curve is this retirement amount we're planning on covering you until the top of the bell curve. And then when we get down to the other side of the bell curve, it's going to drop. Now, some people ask, well, what about my expenses? Aren't my expenses always going to be increasing? That is not what our statistics show. That is what the financial industry says happens, but it's not what our truth shows in facts. What we find is this, right around 78 to 80. The expenses that reduce are travel, automobiles, eating out, entertainment, and clothing. The only expenses that we see actually go up are deductibles for coinsurance on health insurance. However, if a person has a Medicare plan with some kind of good Medicare supplement, or they have the universal plan, then we're not even seeing those costs go up. Now, some people will say, well, I had $50,000 last year for dental work. Well, that could be the case. That might be a one-time expense. Or I had this one surgery that I needed. Well, that could be a one-time expense, but categorically, okay, let's see. We are still having internet turn-off issues here. Daniel, can I get a hand raised? You have audio and video back? Wonderful. Okay, so I think we left off with, we'll just go back just in case, food, utilities, automobile, insurance, clothing, home. And on the one side, it might be increased food. It might be different types of food. It might be going out more. It might be, utilities. Why would somebody have more utilities? Well, they might have a bigger phone plan, or they might have 2 phones versus 1, whereas they could get away with 1 under the need plan. They have more expensive automobiles. They have clothing. They might be spending more money on clothing. They might be upgrading their home. They might be putting things into their home improvement, and of course, travel and gifts. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 budgets. The first budget is going to be that need budget. Then we're going to have the want budget. Now, why is this so important? Because as we start modeling different ideas out to give you what that maximum spend per year is, you want to have different triggers and some different variations so you can go from one side to the other side. And what we do is the financial engineer will slowly bring that analysis down to give you a targeted number each year. Now, of course, some years they're going to be better than other years, but it doesn't mean that you should sway too far off of that average. Now, let's go into the next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to determine our maximum spend before we do a stress test. So look at it like this. What we want to do is we want to build a bridge, and we want to design that bridge on a CAD machine or on a computer, which now we can put on that stress test. We could fill it up with 18 wheelers and determine if the steel that we use, the arching that we use, the footers that we use, will it hold those full 18 wheelers on every spot on that bridge? Or is that bridge going to collapse? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to build that, and then we're going to stress test it in a couple different ways. Okay, so let me show you what your financial planners are doing. So the first thing that they're going to do is once they enter all of your facts, they're going to come over here into plans. And I just created, you can kind of see some of the plans that they will typically create. Now we're looking at just a test client. This isn't anybody's personal information. And so you can see here, these might be buy-sell transactions. They can create a scenario on gifting, income tax reduction, life conversion, which we're going to talk about in a minute, maximum bell curve. Well, this is the scenario that I just created for today. So let's just open that up. And what I had done, or what I did, was I added some of the variations that we can make changes to test what it is that you can spend without running out of money. So the example you see over here on the right-hand side, you can see these are different things that we can change. So if a person maybe wants to buy or sell a piece of real estate, pay off a mortgage or take a mortgage, buy or get rid of life insurance, these are all different variations that we can create models on to test it. Well, today we're testing maximum spend. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple scenarios. One is retirement and death assumptions, inflation and market assumptions, growth rates on portfolios, and living expenses. Now, in this tool that the planners are using for you, they can turn these things off and on. In addition, they can make modifications based upon what you want them to actually model. So in this scenario, we're and he is currently 55 years old, and we're going to show one scenario where he dies in a year. Now, many times you will see financial plans, and they're going to make presumptions of things that will happen far out in the future. As a matter of fact, most of the financial planning software makes this mistake. They'll say something of the order of, well, what happens if Johnny dies at the age of 75? We have to understand how compound interest works. The worst possible scenario is Johnny Las Vegas dies a year after he does this plan. Why? Because then the pension might stop or be reduced. Then Social Security might go down to one Social Security. So again, we're looking at stress testing under the worst case scenarios, death, disability, and I'm not going to push them out until age 85 or age 90 because of the negative effect of that compound interest. So let's go back into the analysis. Inflation and market assumptions. We're going to actually turn on and turn off what just happened, and I'll show you how we do that within what we call an atypical market. We're going to show how we can change different portfolios into modeling. So in this example, in the base facts, and when you hear your planner talk about the base facts, those are the facts in your existing financial blueprint as they exist right now. So if Johnny Las Vegas currently has a Model 2, the average annual rate of return on that Model 2 has been 4.68. If he bumps it up to a Model 4, the average rate of return has gone up. However, so has the volatility. What we're going to do is measure that volatility within the inflation market adjustments to see how that would negatively affect it. Again, stress testing the bridge. And last, now what we're going to do is measure the bell curve. So today, from a financial planner standpoint, you're going to kind of just get a small taste of what your planners are figuring out. And as you can see, there's a lot more that they're figuring out. We haven't even gotten into the modeling of tax loss harvesting, Roth conversions, location distributions, a lot of the things that they're doing for you. This is just figuring out what is the maximum amount that you can spend. This is why I tell people that when they call up somebody and they say, well, what is the max? And this answer magically appears I don't trust it because I know how much time it takes to correctly model out something where we as financial planners feel very comfortable in saying, hey, this is what we think you can do. So let's go back in. We're going to actually create a model here with Johnny Las Vegas. And what we're going to do first is we're going to take off all of these different items or these different triggers here. And we're going to add in some retirement changes. And this will open up the ability to bring in some additional reports, such as what happens if I have a long-term disability? What happens if I have a life insurance, a premature death? And then what is the max retirement spending that I can spend without making any changes at all? Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at, again, we have to create a baseline, like in any hypothesis, any kind of scientific test. We have to create a baseline, and now we're going to measure against that baseline to figure out how much we can actually spend without running out of money. And then we're going to put stress testing on top of that to see if it can support it. All right, so here's the first test. As you see, I took off all of the different triggers. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and says, okay, we're currently spending $90,000 a year, and assuming I do not want to use a linear plan. So here's a great example of a linear plan versus a bell curve plan. You can actually visually see the difference. If I continue to spend here, and again, this is what I believe is perpetrated by the financial industry to lead people to believe that they can't spend as much as they can truly spend. Because why would a financial institution want you to take out more than you're led to believe you can take out? Because they're going to lose money. They're going to lose fees or commissions or whatever they're charging. But it's sometimes misleading to tell somebody, well, let's assume you're going to spend the same thing until you're age 100. It's not happening. Okay. So here is the linear plan on the left-hand side. And as you can see, it shows expenses going all the way up. And then what you can see is at death, there's this giant number up here, about $3.5 million. Look, if you haven't heard me say this before, I'll say it again. If you don't fly first class, your beneficiaries will. And so if you're trying to just save up as much money as you can, and look, it doesn't have to be flying. It doesn't have to be traveling. There's other needs. There could be charities that you could support. There could be grandchildren's college education that you could pay because your kids are struggling. I don't know what it is, but what I'm saying is today, dying with more chips on the table isn't really the best thing. Depending on who gets in office in November, the Democrats want to basically say that the estate tax is coming back and there's 50% tax at death. And, we already know that with $6 trillion, the tax environment is going to be horrendous. So you can plan out to spend your money while you're alive, even if it's gifting money to your kids or grandkids now. So, and there's other ways you could do this. When people have said, well, I'm torn. I'd like to give some money to the kids, but when I die, then I want to have a lump sum given to everybody. Well, then just gift a little bit less and buy life insurance, because then you still can gift, but now you got a big lump sum that you can give away. So here's the linear plan. Now on the other side of the ticket, you'll see this is the bell curve plan. So on the graph or the chart below, you'll see this is where it breaks everything down. So here you see the income flows. This is measuring all your income flows. And again, your financial planner has built out every income flow. I love it when people tell me, well, I've done this online. Look, if there was an online tool that would give us truth in numbers, then I would use that instead of spending all the money that we spend on e-money. The reason that these online tools are a joke is because they don't calculate correctly. They don't calculate the actual income tax. You put in some standard, well, I'm at a 22% income tax bracket. Well, that doesn't calculate if you take more out of a Roth conversion or you use a CRT or you buy and sell a property. So again, I would highly recommend against any kind of online free calculator to calculate how much money you can spend during your lifetime. The only way to do it is do the hard work. You got to do the hard work, which is figuring out from an actual tool how much you can spend. All right, so now let's add in some things here. It says that we can spend up to $116,000 a year. Now, maybe I want to come up here and maybe I say, well, maybe I'll leave the kids a nominal amount, and maybe what I'll do is just make sure that I got $100,000 left over by the time that I die, and I want to make sure that there's at least that amount of money. Well, then I can put in that amount of money and it will reconfigure the amount that I have to spend. Now, let's go in and start adding some triggers in here and see what actually happens. So just remember we're at $116,000. Now, what happens if I click this on? And what I'm going to do is just click this retirement death assumptions on. You're going to want to measure this one item to see how it works. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into that same report and let's see what happens if Johnny Las Vegas dies in the first year. Well, Sarah's pretty happy because, they weren't getting along and now he's gone. She can actually spend more. She can have a little more fun with her life. So they went from $116,000 to $119,000. Why? Well, because of the triggers. So maybe now she inherits his Social Security. But now we've assumed that after his death, she's only going to need $75,000 a year versus the $90,000 a year. So now she doesn't have to spend quite as much. So now she can spend up to $119,000. So now let's go in and we're going to make some assumptions with a market. And so now we know that we're at $119,000 if Johnny dies, but I'm going to take that off. We're going to assume Johnny lives now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the spending. So assuming they're spending $90,000 right now, maybe what I want to do is spend $125,000 into that retirement. And then what I want to do is I want to reduce that down to $75,000. And let's see what happens. Am I going to survive? Will the plan sustain itself? Well, no one knows. Let's see what happens. Well, it sure does. Look at that. The plan at the bottom here, there is still $3.6 million sitting in the plan. Well, that's quite a bit. And now let's go in. Let me recalculate that because it looks like it took that off. There we go. Now it calculated correctly. Okay, so look at that. It drops down, but then it levels off. So it looks like at the end of that time, by the time that Sarah passes, there's 1.143 million. And again, if we look at what that really means in the form of the bell curve, let's go back to that number. Whoops, hold on one second. We are running a little slow on the internet, so we just have to wait till your screen actually catches up with my screen. Otherwise, I'm saying things and they're not connecting. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We can now spend an extra $35,000 per year. However, that's making the presumption that the stock market, the models that they have invested are going to be the same. So now let's build in some actual variations in the market. So now when we have a Model 2, what that means is that there's about 85% in bonds and about 10 to 15% in the stock market. So when we talk about variations in the stock market and in the bond market, they're very different. If we look and we just use historical averages and say that on average, the stock market is going to crash anywhere between 30 to 40% in 1 year or 15 to 20% 2 years in a row. So 15-20 and 15-20. So when we look at a model, the way that our planners model out the volatility is not to say, hey, I have a Model 2. Let's assume a 30% stock market drop. Well, that's unrealistic. Why? Because a Model 2 isn't 100% of the stock market. A Model 2 might only have 10, 15% exposure to the stock market. The other 80, 85% is in the bond market. So how do you model that out? Well, what they do is they take, say, 15% of the stock market, and what they're going to do is they're going to hit 15% of that for 2 years. So if I take 15% and that's the amount that's in the stock market, what I'm going to do is assume, let's say the stock market drops 15% the first year, 15% the second year, So that's 30% in total that the stock market portion of that model is going to drop. So how do I model that? I'm going to take 15% of the allocation in the stock market. It's a little more confusing because I use 15%. Let's do it this way. Let's say that there is 10% in the stock market, and we're going to model a 15% drop. So the first year, if I have $100,000 and I have 10% in the stock market, or $10,000, and the market drops 15% in the first year, how much did I buy? I didn't go down by $15,000. I went down by $1,500. So the second year, it's going to be the same thing. I'm modeling a 30% drop. Now, I still have the bond market. The bond market still has some volatility, but nowhere near the stock market volatility. So now if what I did was I said, okay, I've got 90% sitting inside of the bond market. And let's say that the bond market drops by 5%. So now I've got a $4,500 drop. And assuming that both of them go down, which doesn't always happen, but both go down at the same time, I've got a $4,500 drop and a $1,500 drop. So I've got a total of $6,000 drop. Because it's, again, we only have 10% allocation to the stocks and the 90% allocation to the bonds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume at this point that $100,000 is going to drop by $6,000. So what does that mean? It means I have a 6% drop if I'm using a Model 2. Now, if I go up to, say, a Model 4, now what happens is I might have 40% in the stock market and 60% in bonds. So how do I model that? So I'm going to take 15% of the 40%, and I'm going to take 5% of the 60%. Okay, so 40% times 15, so I have $6,000. And then I've got 5% of the 60, so I've got $3,000. Now I got to remember how much I had over here. I got 6 and 5, I think it was. So I've got 11. So let's just round it up and say I've got a 12% drop. Okay, so let's go back to the tool, and I'm going to show you what the planners are modeling. We're going to go in here into inflation and stock market. And what I'm going to do is if I'm under a Model 4, I'm going to model 12% drop for the first year, 12% drop for the second year. Okay, so 2 years in a row, I'm going to model out a 12% drop. But what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put in a different model. And I'm going to see if even with that larger drop, how do I sustain myself? So again, I think when we figured it before, we figured there's somewhere around a 6% drop in the Model 2. But I'm going to bump it to a Model 4 because over time, I'm trying to achieve a higher rate of return, but understanding I don't want that volatility to mess up my cash flow. So I'm going to model out a 12% drop, but I'm going to bump up my Model 4. Okay, so now some calculations. Okay, so now what just happened? Is I modeled in $125,000, which again, in the base facts, we're only assuming $90,000. We're assuming that the person wants to spend $90,000, but we're saying, hey, let's change that. Let's bell curve it. And let's just take a shot at $125,000, right? Well, here's what the program actually figured out. If I increase it to a Model 4 and I spend currently I spend $125,000 because that's what we model in. The client's actually only spending $90,000. It says I can actually go up to $135,000 per year. And again, this is bell curve, doing the maximum spend so that at the end, I'm basically running out of money. That's what my goal is. Now, if you wonder why there's $917,000 life insurance policy, and the assumption is that if the second person dies at age 90, the life insurance for $1 million kicks in right here, and it's going to give the beneficiaries that $1 million. But the important thing of what we're studying here is how are we able to determine what the maximum spend a person can have is. Now, I will tell you, moving from a Model 2 to a Model 4, which in this particular case, it works. I'm not suggesting that you do this. You will always need to calculate and model out and understand something else. That average rate of return does not mean that you look at that model and say, oh, this year it made 7.68 or whatever that number was. It means 1 year you might make 20. 1 year you might make negative 10. 1 year you might make positive 15, whatever it is. It means that it is going to go up and down. And what this program is doing is to determine, are you or can you sustain the volatility? Now look, we as financial engineers can figure out the mathematics. And we're always going to pull back a notch or two to be more conservative. We have clients for the last couple of years that just kept pushing us, go more risky. Everybody else is making more money. We kept saying, but you don't need to. You just don't need it. And those same people, when asked, what if you saw the market drop 30% and you're in an 80% stock model, what would you do? And they'd say, well, we couldn't sleep at night. Well, then why are you trying to get a higher rate of return? If you can mathematically live the way you want to live, spend what you want to spend, and why there's no risk? It's not rewarded. Again, there's no benefit to it. So the goal here is not to tell you to move up in a model. The goal is to show you how the math is actually computed to come in for your specific situation. Now, here's the second part to this. Again, we can figure out the mathematics. What we have a hard time controlling is the emotion. So over 3.5 decades, what I found is those people that understand how the market works with institutions and how they're playing against you, take advantage when the market is down. This is the time to buy. This is the time to buy things on sale, reinvest dividends, do Roth conversions. This is a wonderful back from now in 2 years, 24 to 36 months. I think I'm going to be very happy to do the things that I did even with my own portfolio. However, you do get some of those people that want to see an average rate of return, and then when the market drops, they actually say, I want to sell. Well, we can't do that and get this plan to work. You're better off sticking it at a 1% or 2% CD. There's nothing out there in this entire investment world. Now, there's some promoters that might tell you that there are, but I'm here to tell you that they're a fraud and they do not last. These are the Bernie Madoffs. These are the privately listed REITs that promise 6, 7, and 8% every year with no risk. These are the land deals. These are all the kinds of scams I just see over and over and over, like viaticals and the more just crazy stuff, right? So again, you have to sustain or understand that if you're going to go for a higher rate of return, you have to be able to sleep with the volatility. So what we do is kind of a mixture of mathematics and engineering, but also monitoring the emotion of a client to make sure that even though we might mathematically prove that we can do a certain thing, we may tend to tell that client not to do it if their history shows, or if they reveal that they've made these kind of emotional moves in the background, or they tell us that this is what would make them uncomfortable. We don't want to set them up for failure. So the goal today is to figure out how to calculate what the maximum amount is that you can spend. So I think you got a little bit of an insight into what the planners are doing. Now, I'm going to go through real quickly what stress testing is now. Is the planners are going to go back in once they come up with that baseline. So now you can see where they start to establish that baseline. And now what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, what happens if this person dies? Now remember, this person has $1 million in life insurance, right? So now we're going to show this same person, Johnny, dying at age 56. Now what happens? Because we've increased the cash flow to $125,000, and let me make sure they're all clicked on this time. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're all clicked on. And now you see what happens is that $1 million of life insurance gives this big, giant turbocharge. So now what we want to do is we want to say, well, do we actually need the life insurance? If the spouse says, yes, I would like to spend the same or greater, then we might want to keep that life insurance. Well, what if we don't want to keep that life insurance? Well, there's other things that we're going to do. We're going to look at the first of volatility. Then we're going to look at life insurance or the death of each spouse. And then we're going to stress test for healthcare catastrophes. What would it look like if a person had to go into a nursing home at an extra $78,000 to $100,000 a year? What we're going to then do is we're going to change the investment models and measure the difference, which I just showed you. When it comes to the death benefits, first we're going to determine the need. The reason I threw that $1 million in there at the beginning is so you can see he doesn't need the life insurance. Remember, life insurance is generally sold. It's not purchased as a part of a plan. And what I mean by that is when most people say, why did you buy this life insurance? Oh, the insurance agent scared the heck out of me. My family would be on the street if I didn't do it, so I bought it. Well, or most people say, I don't know, there was some great offer on and bought the insurance. And so a lot of times insurance is not purchased as a part of an engineered blueprinted plan. So the first thing you want to do is figure out, A, do you need it? Same thing with long-term care insurance. B is, do you have the right kind of insurance? Now, once you determine what that is, there are actions. If you need to buy more insurance because your plan calls for it, what type? Do we buy life only or do we buy a hybrid, meaning that it has long-term care coverage on it? If we're getting rid of a life insurance, and here's one of the biggest mistakes people make. When they either think they don't need the insurance or they go to the extent of actually having an engineered blueprinted plan which proves that they don't need the insurance, most people make a big mistake of just turning the insurance in. They just cancel it. Well, there's some adverse or opportunities that you might be missing out on. Here's one of them. You have to determine if you can just cancel it. Number two, can you sell the policy? In life insurance, there's actually what's called a secondary market, and the secondary market is just like the stock market. The people will bid on life insurance policies. Of course, what they're going to do is they're going to determine your life expectancy based upon a health questionnaire. And you may not be able to sell your life insurance, or depending upon your health, you might be able to sell it for a lot more than its cash value. Even term insurance with no cash value should be sold. So again, after that determination of life insurance, you got to determine, you're just going to outright cancel it, you're going to sell it. Or here's another option. Can we convert it to an annuity to preserve the tax loss or avoid taxable gain? Life insurance can be a taxable event. So I warn you against just outright canceling a cash value life insurance. You can create a tax event by doing that. So there's a strategy. It's called a 1031 exchange, a 1035 exchange, sorry, back in my real estate days. 1035 exchange. It allows you to move life insurance into an annuity. Now, if you followed any of my past webinars on annuities, you've learned what kind to buy, what kind not to buy, the good, the bad, the ugly about annuities. But you can actually exchange a life insurance policy with cash value into an annuity, and that preserves the tax deferral. Now, on the flip side, here's what a lot of people don't know. A life insurance policy has a basis. That basis is the amount that you invested in premiums. If the amount of the premiums exceed the amount of the cash value, and we're going to leave out that you've taken a loan, don't follow what I'm telling you now if you have a loan against it, but assuming there's no loan, if the amount of the cash value is less than the amount that you paid in premiums, you've lost money. However, you are not allowed to take a tax loss on a life insurance. So if you just go outright cancel the life insurance, you can't take the tax loss. However, what you can do, you can use the 1035 exchange. You can 1035 or roll it over from the life insurance to an annuity. Now the catch is, you got to leave it in the annuity 1 year and 1 day. The reason is, you have to show that the annuity was intended as investment for gain. If you sell an annuity for a loss, you can take an ordinary tax deduction. This is not a capital loss where it's limited to the $3,000 or gain. This is what, and this is really for the financial planner that I see that's on the line right now. This is a Form 4797 ordinary income loss on investments, and you can take it right against income in a specific year. So again, before you just outright do something with a life insurance, make sure that you're consulting with a qualified financial planner and they can run those calculations for you. So those are your options. Now let's summarize changes and we then retest it. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out, do we want a linear plan based on your life expectancy, or are we going to run that plan with a bell curve? Those are very important factors. You cannot start a plan without you making that decision first. Second, we're going to stress test. We're going to change models in the portfolio. We're going to use different volatility and variations. We're going to make the assumption that somebody dies. We're going to make the assumption that somebody goes into a long-term care facility. And once you make these assumptions and you retest it, you're going to come up with an assumable amount during your lifetime. Now, again, this might be a lot more than what you are spending right now. So let me connect in with one of the webinars that I did actually last night. Last night I talked about real estate, getting ready for real estate. And an option may be to figure out what your maximum spend is per year. And if there's a variation, then take half of that and you might be able to go buy that vacation property. I would never say go up to the maximum amount. You want to give yourself some clearance. But let me give you an example. Let's say, as an example, I have a client that's spending, say, $90,000 a year right now. Let's further assume that by the modeling and some changes that we make, they can now spend, call it 140. I'm doing this because it's a round number. So let's say that there's a difference of $50,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take half of that, $25,000. Now, that $25,000 is about $2,000 a month. I'm rounding. That is going to buy about a $200,000 property. Now, if I want a vacation play, like we talked about in the rental property webinar, I might be able to buy a $400,000 because the renters are covering the other half. If I'm just something that I want to use on my own, that's going to be $200,000. If I want to buy something that I'm going to rent long term, I can go and assume a vacancy ratio of 100%. So I can assume I never rent it. Now, could I cover that negative cash flow with the $2,000? So what I'm showing you is what I refer to as velocity of money. Now, the feds have a different definition of the velocity of money on taxation. The way I teach velocity of money is if you take money and you repurpose it rather and do nothing, it can grow, it can flourish, and it can give you personal enjoyment and memories. So again, you can take something that you would otherwise say, hey, to the age of 90 and I die and I leave my heirs $3 to $5 million. Well, what could I do with it now? Could I buy if I really wanted to leave an inheritance, could I buy a life insurance policy and maybe not leave them $3 million, but I could leave them $10 million? Or do I not want to leave them a large inheritance, but what I want to do is take the excess cash flow, I want to travel more, buy a nicer car. Maybe I want to give money to the church or charity. Maybe I want to start gifting money to kids and grandkids so I can see how they will operate. So the goal is figure out what that maximum spend is first. Then you can start to figure out what you can do with it to make the money productive. Now, I am not one for jumping into biblical stories, but maybe you have heard the story of the tenants. Tenants were a form of money. And there's a story in the Bible that goes as, there was 3 slaves and their owner left town and he gave each of the slaves 3 tenants. And he said, do what you can do with these tenants and make and produce more. So when I get back, the tenants have multiplied. And so what the first slave did is he took the tenants, he went and bought seed, he planted a field, and he doubled the amount of tenants that he was given. He doubled the money. The second tenant, or the second slave, took those 3 tenants, and what he bought more land and built additional buildings. He increased the tenants. The third tenant was worried that he was going to lose the money and make a mistake. So he didn't want the owner to be angry at him. So he went in the back and he buried them in the dirt. So when the slave owner got home, he asked each of the slaves and said, "What did you do with the money that I gave you?" So the first tenant said, "Well, I've doubled it." And so the owner said, "Well, that's fantastic." And he gave him more tenants and he gave him the land to work. The second slave said, "I bought more land, I bought more real estate, I've increased your holdings." He let that slave free, let him go live on the land, and he then charged him rent because he said, "You did a great job." I know this is a little extreme, but as the story goes, the third slave said, "I didn't want to lose your money, so I buried it." So he beheaded him. It's a little extreme, but the moral of the story is this. What we want to do is be productive, not only with our lives, but make sure that the money is being used and being reproduced in a good and positive way. Okay? With that in mind, I know we covered a lot of intense things today. And as I said, what you're seeing today is just a small sliver of what your financial planners are doing. But with that in mind, let me see if I have any questions. And I've gotten away from some of the questions because they're too specific. And as we said before, you can email specific questions to your planners. I can't really answer, here's one, what stock should I buy in that portfolio? I do appreciate you asking those questions, but as you can see, we don't just shoot off the hip. We're not like these people on TV that say, "Well, we think you should go buy this stock," or "This stock is great right now." Everything what we do is calculated and measured before it's done. So let me just see if I have, I love you guys. Thank you so much for all the good questions, but I don't see anything in here that I can answer things that are general in nature. If you have questions about how these plans are produced, such as, should you bell curve to 78 versus 80, then I can tell you, it's based upon family history. I could tell you general things, but I'll tell you what, I see I see a couple of people on here that I do not have, that it doesn't show that you're registered with an email. So if you can, the email wasn't confirmed. So if you want, you can send an email into support@hhtba.net and we can get you your questions answered. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to sign off, and hopefully tonight has been helpful. And this is why I tell everybody, say a big thank you to your friends. You see what the amount of work is that they're doing behind the scenes. While it's like a duck swimming on water. You're just looking at the duck gliding along, but boy, underneath that water, their feet are going 1,000,000 miles a minute. And so that's really what the financial planners are doing. They're working really hard behind the scenes to do these calculations. All right. So with that in mind, I'm signing off. Have a great night.